Good morning and welcome to the Wayward Path of the Warrior. This is our first show here, and I thought it was fitting to get it started. I was hoping to do it live last night from the Pentagon Memorial, and due to COVID, that has closed down. We're not allowed to go in there to shoot, so we're going to do this morning. And I thought it was fitting to start off the first show with reflections on 9/11 because that is a huge part of my journey here. I was one of the first responders to the Pentagon on 9/11, and 2 years later, due to my own struggles with PTSD, I almost ended my life in October of 2003. Since that day, 9/11 has always been a struggle for me. And yesterday was the first day in 20 years that I had been back on that site on that day. Normally what I have done is kind of gone off. I'll go up to Skyline Drive or somewhere like that just to kind of get away from everything, to not see the news, to not hear the stories. And last year, I had to present at a conference, and I had asked the conference not to put me on 9/11. And however it worked out, I ended up having to speak that day on PTSD and talking about my journey and how that relates to veterans and first responders that are returning to college with PTSD and some of the accommodations that they need. And what came out of that day was seeing 3 of my students that I had brought with me to this conference reached out to me starting the day before and leading up to my presentation and following. Throughout the day, I was getting text messages. They were stopping by. They were seeing how I was doing, checking in on me. And I got through the day. Yesterday and the day before started with much of the same. Friday morning, I am an adjunct professor now also at Marymount University, which has been one of the best things that has happened to me in a long time. I get a lot of fulfillment out of that, with getting to interact with all of these young folks and get their views on things, as well as share my stories, and hopefully bring some of the 23 years of law enforcement experience that I have to them and helping them to decide what career journey to go down. But I spoke to them. I have a group of freshmen. I spoke to them Friday morning about 9/11. And I started the class off. I asked how many of them were alive at the time 9/11 happened, and not one hand went up. And I wanted to give them a view of the experience without giving them too much of a view of the experience, if you understand what I'm saying. I did not want to show them the clips over and over again like we see so much on television. And while that helps us never forget what happens, it is, I know for me, it's very hard to do. But as the day went on and into yesterday, my students once again started reaching out to me, both current students and former students. And to me, it says a lot, and about their character, and about, I'm hoping that it means that when I'm speaking to them, that they're listening and that they're taking in what I'm saying. And I've always given them part of the syllabus as my number to reach out if they have any questions, concerns, whatever. And they used it in the last couple of days just to check on me to make sure I was doing good. We didn't get to do the 9/11 5K last year in Arlington, but we did yesterday, and it was great. We had, I believe, 2,000 runners and lots of spectators there. I got to see several of the men and women that I was out at the Pentagon with on 9/11. which was great, especially some of the folks that have since retired, and getting to see them again and just kind of reflecting on stuff. And I had my kids with me there, and at the beginning when we first popped on here, I had a graphic of the 3 books that I've written, which are available on Amazon and also on, if you go to the website at Catalyst of Change Associates, it is on there. The first book that I wrote was on the conversations that I had with my son around my experience at 9/11 and my PTSD, because unfortunately for him, as he was growing up, he got to still see some of the after effects of that, the mood swings, the depression, that were brought on more after the fact of 9/11, from when I broke my neck training for a fight and was told I was never going to be able to be a cop again, and that I was never going to possibly be able to walk after the second surgery where they had to fuse C2 through C7. But I was able to get through that. I got my mind straight and was able to return to work. That surgery happened in July of 2015, and I returned to work full duty on the day of the Marine Corps Marathon that year. But during that time span, I lost several friends, some to suicide, a few that I grew up with to overdoses, and one of my really good buddies, Jeff McMichael, to cancer. And that one hit me the hardest of all of them. And another one that hit me hard was a guy that I grew up with by the name of John Stringfellow. It was a Maryland State Trooper that was involved in a bad incident with a dad that kidnapped his daughters and ended up murdering them. And John thought that he had saved them, and ended up finding out when he was involved in the incident with him on the Bay Bridge that he did not, and that the 2 little girls had been murdered. And I believe it was about a year later, as John's mom was bringing him back across the bridge, John said he wasn't feeling well and asked her to stop the car. And at that point, he got out of the vehicle and jumped. And my ex-wife had called me to let me know what had happened, and that just started a downward spiral again. And then from there, my buddy Jeff ended up getting sick with cancer, and he passed away later from that. And that was where my son started seeing a lot of the depression coming back out. And this little guy, he's now 11, but I tell people all the time, he's like a 99-year-old trapped in an 11-year-old's body, because he asks you these questions that no adult would ever do. He asked you things that just come to him. There's no filter. There's no worrying about your feelings being hurt. He just asks whatever comes to his mind. And he's also very, for his age, very compassionate, very empathetic. And he always seems to know when I'm struggling with something, when I'm not, and knows what to say somehow. And it was 2 years ago, because we didn't get to do the race last year, but 2 years ago, I took him over to the Pentagon for the first time, did a memorial. And I walked around and I showed him the benches and what they represented, and we read some of the names, and I explained to him why some benches were small and some were larger, why some were facing into the Pentagon and some were facing out. And at one point we got to the place where the plane had struck, and I broke down. And this little 9-year-old kid came up and he put his arm around me and he said, "It's okay, Daddy. I think we need to go home now." And we got back in the car, and when everybody got home, as we were walking in from the garage, he tugged on my shirt and he's like, "Daddy, can we have a conversation?" And so in my head, I'm like, what 9-year-old stops to go, hey, can we have a serious conversation right now? And then I began to wonder, what questions is he going to come up with this time? But he didn't have any that morning or that afternoon. And he said, Daddy, I wanted you to know why I was crying, because when I saw you get so upset, I thought you were going to hurt yourself again. And you talk about getting kicked in the gut, because for so long I never looked at the impact of what I was going through and what that had on anybody else around me. And I was very selfish in that way, but I was also in a fog most of the time, and I couldn't see that. Very similar to when he came in to my room the one day and I was just laying in bed kind of staring at the wall in a depression, and he said, why won't you play with me? Which is where the title of that first book came from. But that hit me because I'm going through this stuff, but I'm not seeing. It's almost like a pot of boiling water on a stove. And you take so much in and so much in, and it builds up, and then it begins to overflow onto everyone around you. And for those of us that have suffered or still suffering with PTSD and depression, we don't recognize how what we're going through can impact those around us, and how what we're going through kind of overflows onto everyone around us. And that little guy has been probably my best peer support in my entire life, because through his honesty and through his non-filtered questions, he made me have to step back and look at what I was going through. And that for me was very hard to do, because when you are reliving your incident day after day after day after day, and I literally, when we got down to the Pentagon on 9/11, there was audible tones that were going off telling us there was another plane 5 minutes out, 4 minutes out, 3 minutes out, and the countdown kept going until they realized they were friendlies. And every time that I heard that audible tone, I would be back there again. Every time a plane would fly over low, I would be back there again. Smells, sounds, all took me back there again. The looks on the people's faces as we were running towards the building and they were running out. The looks on people's faces that I interacted with throughout the day. The one young lady that I had to chase down, she ran under the police tape after we had set it up, and I had to chase her down to close to in front of the building, and she said I left something on my desk. And when I looked at her, you could see she was not there. To be there and hear the calls of get back away from the building, because when we got down there, those floors had not collapsed yet, and the building was very unstable. To hear all the screaming and the yelling, the smells, the sights that you saw, the smell of jet fuel that you could not get rid of, all the chaos that went on that day. And then on top of it, you couldn't get on your phone to call your family. My family knew I was down there, but they didn't know where I was. They didn't know if I was alive. They didn't know anything. And I didn't get in contact with them until very, very, very late in the day. I don't think I got home that night till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't see any of the stuff that had happened in New York or in Pennsylvania until the following week. And later that year, there was New Year's weekend. I was married at the time. We went up to New York City for New Year's Eve, and the next morning we went over to Ground Zero. And to say that what we went through at the Pentagon was chaotic, when I stepped out on that platform there and looked over that site, I couldn't even begin to imagine what the men and women in New York went through. My father-in-law at the time was telling the people in the line, because then, if for people that were alive back then or old enough to remember, there was fences with pictures of people that were missing. And as we were standing in line and I'm looking at all these faces of people that were no longer with us, he was telling people that I had responded to the Pentagon that day, and people were coming up and thanking me and trying to hug me, and I didn't want any part of it, because I didn't feel like anything I did that day was special. That's our job. That's what we do. And by that point, I had already started to withdraw from everybody. I would go to work every day. I would come home at night and I would go upstairs and I would lock myself in a room. And I did not want to have any part of anything. And in May of the following year, my wife at the time told me that she was leaving. And I lived in a small town, and my parents lived down the street. My sister and her husband lived down the street from them, and I didn't tell anybody that she left, out of already going through everything I was going through, but then on top of that, feeling like an absolute failure for losing my marriage. And for months and months, she was in graduate school at the time, and I would make excuses every time my parents would call me or my sister would call me that she was either at school, she was at work, she wasn't there. And then that morning came in October of 2003, and I woke up and it was a beautiful day, just like 9/11, just like it was yesterday. And I went downstairs and I opened the door and I went back across the room and I sat on the couch and I started writing out my note. And I couldn't deal anymore. I could not. I was so exhausted from not sleeping, not eating. I was tired of reliving that day over and over and over and over. I was tired of being at work and having to go and disappear into places because I needed to have a minute to get myself together. And I didn't want anybody to see what I was going through. Because back then, if you asked for help, if you said you were struggling, there was no, it's okay not to be okay. You very realistically face losing your job. And I know that still goes on today, and I don't get it. But as I wrote my note out that morning, and I sat there and I looked out the door at the sunshine and with tears in my eyes, and I raised my gun up to my head, and as I started to pull the trigger back, for whatever reason, at that moment, I had a little tiny bit of clarity that if I did this right now, my wife was going to get blamed for it. because nobody knew, and they would find out and she would get blamed for it. And it's, as I reflect on that, as I've done many times in the last few years, it's very odd to me that that came to me at that point. I don't know why that was given to me at that point. I don't know why I was given that where other people that I know were not. And they ended up losing their battles with PTSD. And I was also very fortunate after having that happen that I ran into a guy that I knew from years before when I first started. And I was going through rehab for shoulder surgery. And I got hooked up with some folks that were doing they were doing these 3-day post-critical incident seminars with the first responders. And I went in there and I was, the most ironic piece of all this is that I was on our peer support team at the time of 9/11. And I knew all the things that needed to be done, but I couldn't do them for myself. I could tell you how to handle your stuff the best that I knew, but for myself, I couldn't do it. And I went into this group, and Irene Hajisava and Kathy Thomas were the two counselors that were in there. And they would take you out and do EMDR with you. And Irene did EMDR with me the first time, and it was the first time that I smiled. It was the first time that I laughed since 9/11. And I credit her and Kathy with being the ones that truly saved my life, because through doing the EMDR, I was able to begin healing. And I got kept on there as a law enforcement peer with them. And every time that we would do one of these PCS seminars, one of the two of them would pull me aside and do EMDR with me. And through that, my healing began as I continued on this journey. And there were still days that were really, really bad, and there were some days that were really, really good. And I think anybody that has suffered with or is suffering with PTSD will tell you it is an up and down roller coaster. And there's a lot of time back in October of 2003 for me. I could not see my value. I couldn't see my potential. I couldn't see anything that I had to anybody. All I knew was that everything hurt. And after having the EMDR, I started telling people my story. And I started to see that by sharing what I went through, I was able to reach someone here, someone there. And it felt like I had a purpose again. And it felt like I was able to make a difference for at least one person. And as this journey continued, like I said, it was up and down, and there were days that were great and days that were bad. And when I got up to 2015 and the neck surgeries, things were bad again. And I had ballooned up to like 340, 350 pounds, somewhere like that, out of going from being very active and fighting and doing all this stuff to being told I was never going to be able to do it again. And when they did the second surgery and the doctor telling me, I don't think you're going to be able to, or I don't know that you're going to be able to walk, and you're never going to be able to do your job again. You never think about the things that you do every day. Get up out of bed, walk down the street, go for a jog. You don't think about that stuff until the potential of it being taken away is there. And the night before that second surgery, I stood in my kids' doorways and I cried because I didn't know if I was going to be able to play with them again. I didn't know if I was going to be able to go out and, run around with my son and throw the football and do that stuff. And that when you have those things happen to you, that is when you really start to be impacted by stuff that you've never thought about before. And when I had the surgery and they finished up and they were rolling me up the hallway, the nurse tapped me on the shoulder and she said, all right, get your big ass up and walk into the room. The doctor doesn't want you just laying around. I knew I had cleared that first hurdle. And then I started to get kind of angry because I'm like, well, who is this doctor to tell me I can't do stuff? And as I laid there that night in that hospital room, after being able to get up and walk, I was like, I'm going back to work. I'm not going to retire. I'm not letting this be, I'm going out on how I want to go out. I'm not going out this way. And I'm not going to let somebody who barely knows me tell me what I can do and what I can't do. And so I missed, I believe it was 2 to 3 weeks of work before I could go back on light duty. But then I got back into the gym and I started getting on the bike and on the elliptical machine, and I started working and working and working and working. And I was able to return to duty. And I was able to get back into shape where I went from 340, 350 pounds back down to 240. And I had to stop and start to modify things that I did because I knew how fortunate I was to be able to be in the position that I was and to be able to return to work and be able to walk and be able to play with my kids. And I felt like for the second time, I was given a second chance. October 2003, October 2015. And I have these giant whiteboards in my house, in my office at my house, and in my office at the department. And they're like 6 foot by 7 foot or 7 foot by 8 foot. I forget. They're big. They take up most of the wall. And there's just lists and lists of things to do and quotes and things to focus on. And people will see them and say, how do you do all this stuff? Why are you doing all this stuff? But when you get to that point where you're about to take your life, for those of us who have, for whatever reason, been given that opportunity, that second chance, where others have not, you realize how important life is. And you start to realize, at least for me, I started to realize that while all the things I've been through sucked, I was able to help somebody else by talking about them. By sharing my journey, I was able to show people that there is another side to this, that there is, while you're in a fog and you may be standing at the edge of the abyss looking into the darkness and thinking, I have no value, I have no purpose, I have no reason to be here, that if you can just for a moment think tomorrow's another day, if you can just for a moment think somebody needs me, a pet needs me, if you can just get past that moment in time, tomorrow is a completely new day. And I was given that opportunity, and I will be damned if I waste a minute. I was given the opportunity to teach, and that was one of the scariest things that I've had to do, standing the first day in front of all these students. But I found that by opening up and being honest with them and being like, this is who I am, and I want you to be good. My first class with them is always about health and wellness. And it's always about the importance of mental health. Many of them are going into criminal justice, but regardless of the career field that they're choosing, that needs to be the priority. And while they're in school, it needs to be the priority, because we often think that young people that are in school, whether it's elementary school up to college, this is the time of their life. They have everything easy. They don't understand stress. And it's the farthest thing from the truth. And you have so many amazing young people that have done so many great things so far as they're starting that college journey. And I have them do their first assignment, and they are to tell me how they got there, why they're here, what they want to do, as well as how they take care of themselves. And I have learned so much and been given a different perspective on so many things from these young folks. And I've also seen how by opening up to them, they've opened up to me when they're struggling, and then they've also reached out to me. And for the 3 students last year, they had only known me for 2 weeks. And for them to take so much time to check on me over and over and over again, that meant the world to me. And it told me that what I was doing was good. And I've had a lot of people say, you can't talk about this stuff. You can't be this open about things. You're going to end up getting yourself in trouble with work and things like that. But I haven't had that experience. And I know there are people that have, but I haven't had that experience. The agency that I've worked for, they allowed me to go out and talk to the entire staff about mental health and wellness. They allowed me to share my story. And I had people coming up to me afterwards saying, we didn't know you were going through this stuff. After working with them for years and years and years. And when I sat last night and the day before and reflected on 20 years, and I can't believe it's been 20 years. I realized how much I have grown, as well as how much I've suffered, how fortunate that I've been, and the opportunities that have been given to me. And some people will say it's because of hard work, but I think that we're all here for a purpose, and I think that our path of our journey, we are all being guided along that journey. We have a purpose to be here. And all of the people that, while they're out along their journeys, they intersect with us and they have lessons to teach us. And we learn from them and we grow from them, and we learn good and we learn bad. We learn how to do things and how not to do things. And we have people that inspire us and people that make us realize, I don't ever want to go down that path. And I reflected yesterday not only on the events of 9/11, but on the people that I've met. And I did an interview Friday for the Red, White, and You show, and with Dean McMurray. And I discussed some of those people and how they've influenced me. And recently, I had the absolute honor to go through the Warrior Path program in December of last year. And it's one of the biggest hidden gems that are out there for first responders and military that are suffering with PTSD and have been impacted by trauma. And you go, I went to the Bluemont site in Virginia, and you spend a week on this campus, and it's usually small groups. Mine was 6 people. But they also have mobile teams that do these around the country, and they have a site in Arizona, and they now have a site out in Seattle, Washington, I believe, which one of my brothers from my group is a path guide there. And I walked into this room the first day and looked at these 5 other guys, and I was the only one there that was not military. So I already felt out of place. And one of the first questions they asked us was, who doesn't want to be here? Who contemplated as you were coming here, turning around and going home? And I only lived 20 minutes from the site, and every minute of that drive had to have been like, how can I get out of this? How can I, what excuse can I use? Because I knew going there, just from the little bit that I heard, that I was going to have to face not only what I went through, but I was going to have to face me. And I was going to have to look at my journey, not just the good parts, but the bad. And that was probably one of the hardest weeks to go through, and one of the greatest weeks in my entire life. Because we went from a group of men that did not know each other. We sat there with our arms crossed when this started, to a group of men that ended in the middle of a labyrinth. Having aided each other getting through the labyrinth, with carrying everything that we came there with, to standing there in the center of that labyrinth and hugging each other and telling each other that we loved each other, and knowing at that point that we were better men because we were in each other's lives now. And I remember walking out of that labyrinth, and Carl Haskins, who is the mobile team leader that led our path group, I stopped as I was going out in front of him, and he just said, leadership recognizes leadership. And that experience gave me so much so many tools to be able to use to recognize my struggles, to recognize my little victories and the importance of them, but most importantly, to recognize that PTSD and that trauma from 9/11 was not who I am. It was an event that happened to me. And I saw how everything in my life leading up to that point had put me into that position. And how everything from that point of walking out of that labyrinth moving forward was going to put me in a much better position. And every week, myself and those 5 other men get on a Zoom call. And every day, we're texting one another with our victories, with our struggles, jokes, motivating each other. And while I've been able to go out and speak, and I've been able to write kids' books, and I've been able to talk to people one on one, it was that journey with those men that made me think I need to do something different. And I need to not focus so much on work, but I need to focus on me. And I need to focus on my journey as a whole. And as I move forward with the show, I'm going to be bringing you people that intersected my path and people that have helped me grow and that I've learned from, in hopes that maybe something that is said during that time will speak to you. I'm going to bring you my 5 brothers to tell their stories and to give you their perspective on what we got, not only as a group from Warrior Path, but what they got as individuals. And I am hopeful that as I bring people here, that something that is said will reach out to somebody somewhere, even if it's only one person. That what is said, that something will speak to them and help them see that there is so much more ahead. One of the things my son told me one night when I was talking to him was, you know, Dad, I'm glad you didn't hurt yourself, because if you had, I wouldn't be here. And I had to sit back and think about everything that has happened since that day in October of 2003 and everything that I would have missed had I not had that 1 second of clarity. And yesterday and Friday, when I was teaching my class, I told the students, if nothing else, on 9/11, I want you to take just 1 minute and reflect on all the lives that were lost that day. And regardless of how you feel about first responders, I want you to always remember the men and women that ran into those towers, the pictures of those firefighters climbing the stairs, knowing very well that they were probably not going to be coming out, but that there were people somewhere in that building that needed help, and they were not going to turn around and leave without making that effort. To listen to the phone calls that were made from the airplanes, from the towers, of the people that knew they very well were not going to be coming home that next day or that night. And they just wanted to say goodbye. Told them to take 1 minute and just reflect on how the world changed that day. And then I wanted them to think of one person in their life that had impacted them positively, that had made a difference. And I wanted them to reach out to them and tell them how important they were. Because that day showed us that tomorrow is not promised. And we all think that we have all this time and we can just wait till tomorrow. That we can tell the people that are important to us how important they are tomorrow. Don't wait. And I sat yesterday or at that race and I looked at my kids and I looked at all the people that were there and I looked at all of my brothers and sisters that were there that day and the new folks that have just joined and the pride that they take in that uniform. And I looked at all of the officers that I was at the Pentagon with that day and remembered how all of us were scared to death, yet we ran towards while everyone ran away. And then I looked at my kids and I hoped that they will never have to see a day like that again. And I hope that they will never have to worry about whether or not their dad is coming home. And that night I sat and thought about how blessed I've been and how fortunate I've been to have all the things that I've had since that day in October. And I am hopeful to continue down this path regardless of how bumpy the road is and how many obstacles come along the way. But I am hopeful that the men and the women that I bring to you on this show will speak to you with their words, with their actions, and show you that no matter how tough situations can be, how traumatic things can be, that tomorrow is always a new day. And if you can just get over that little hump, if you can just have that moment of clarity to see past, that there's so much laying ahead for you, that there is so many things that are coming. It is okay to not be okay. It's okay to struggle. It is okay to be depressed. It is okay to have days where you just don't know what you're going to do. But reach out and ask for help. And every day, tell the people around you how important they are to you. Tell the people that have impacted you and that have made your journey better, thank you. When you see somebody struggling, ask them, are you okay? And just sit and listen. This is not rocket science. Just sit and listen. By sitting there and allowing somebody to speak to you and allowing somebody to get what they're going through off their chest, by asking, are you okay? That simple little question will let them know that somebody cares. Because when they're standing at that edge of the abyss, they don't think anybody cares. That one simple question and being present for just that moment can be the difference between somebody moving forward or somebody's journey coming to an end. Be the light in the darkness for somebody. Share your journey. Be present. Be compassionate. Be like the world was on September 12th, 2001, where it didn't matter where you came from, how much money you had, your race, your religion, none of that mattered. We cared about one another as human beings. So as you go forward today, as you go out and do whatever you're going to do today, be present, be thankful, and be the light in the darkness for somebody out there that is struggling. Thank you to everybody that has joined me today. I greatly appreciate it, and I greatly appreciate all the support from all the individuals over the last 20 years that I have gotten. And I greatly appreciate each and every one of my students that have reached out to me as well. I hope everybody has a great day. Be safe, be kind, and I will talk to you later.